Hello, this is Scott Bouldin, and I would like to welcome you to another edition of SBM Studios podcast. Hello again, and we welcome everybody back to the SBM Studios podcast. This is our third episode, and we're tickled to have a special guest with us today, a longtime friend of mine and former ministry partner, Brother Rodney Brazil, currently pastoring Connection Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And we look forward to discussing several things with Rodney today. But Rodney, I'd like to welcome you. And the way I usually start these things out is to have my guests kind of give an introduction, say anything you'd like to start out with as far as your family or what you'd like to have our listeners know about you. So take it away, Rodney.
Well, Scott, it is an honor to be with you today, and we are thrilled to have this opportunity to do this podcast with you. My first one to ever do. So this is out of my box and maybe even out of my comfort zone a little bit. So if I sound nervous, that's why. Give me a pulpit or give me a microphone, and we can do that. But I don't know about these podcast deals, but it is good to be able to renew old acquaintance and spend some time together talking about ministry and all that God has done. We are excited to be here in Louisville, Kentucky, working and to have my family with me and on board with all that we're doing. My wife, Ashley, originally from the Dothan, Alabama area, and then our three kids, Dylan, which is just finished his first year in college, so he'll be a sophomore this fall. Our daughter, Elena, and she'll be what is she going to be? She's going to be a junior this year in high school. Yeah, wow is right. And then our youngest one, she's Bella. She will be 8 years old, and she will be a second grader this year. So it's cool third grade. She's telling me she's listening in. So she'll be in third grade this year. So I'll tell you, time is flying by so fast here. I can't even keep up with it. So, but it's good to have my family to be involved with what we're doing. And each one of them has a special part in our ministry here. And it's awesome to be able to do what we're doing as a family.
Yes, sir. And you talk about how time flies. I was thinking about that, and you said you've got one who just finished the first year in college. You've got a junior next year. I've got a senior this coming year, and it just seems like yesterday that you and I were teenagers, and I thought maybe we'd talk a little bit. I know some people who will listen to this will know us together from days gone by, and you and I had commonality in that we were young roadies for Columbians and Bama Boys back in the day when you and I were mere babies, just traveling around. And I know that you and your sister Loretta traveled around a lot, especially in the Bama Boys years. And I know your first cousin with Mark Jones, who played piano with the Bama Boys for years. And then eventually Loretta married Neil Champion, my cousin, and a longtime singer with the Bama Boys. And they still minister together with Chosen Witness. But you and I kind of grew up together, and I was thinking about the memories of that. And I was thinking about, my first memories of you, I guess, was before either one of us really had a part in the group, but we would go around, and whoever was playing drums at the time, we would help tear down the drum set or try to wrap up a chord. And I know, thinking back on it now, being an adult, probably I was more in the way most of the time than helping, but they were always kind to let us help. But is that about the time that you kind of remember me from?
Yeah, that's where it all started for sure. That's where our paths crossed, and man, that's going back quite a few years there.
Oh yeah,
got to dust off the cobwebs in the memory department on that. Oh man, it was awesome, and I don't know how we really became good friends with the differences in schools, college sports and stuff.
Sure. Hey.
It's a love-hate relationship there, but that's understandable. One of these days, I guess one of us will get our heart right and join the other team. Who knows? But
that's because you were actually a Mississippi young man who was a big time Alabama fan,
And still
and
that way.
still that way
Yes,
no matter where you live. So that's
that's
fine.
right.
I have no
Yep.
problem. I've got several lost friends down around here too. So no,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. But no, and we grew up like that, and yeah. Thinking about how we traveled along is I guess you'd say fans. Of course, we were family, two members, but fans, and then that progressed to I guess
Yeah.
the first tiptoes into ministry that you and I experienced was when we actually had the privilege to become part of
Right.
the Bama Boys quartet. And
Right.
I started out myself first playing drums when I never will forget the night. The drummer stepped over a trailer hitch and did not make the step all the way. He came up with a dislocated broken arm, and Uncle Jake looked at me and said, "You're playing drums tonight." And I thought, what? But that's kind of where it started, and then eventually I stepped in and started doing a little singing, and then the same thing. Basically, I guess about the time when Uncle Jake, or that's what I call him, most folks know him as Joe Champion, and Avon Rushing, longtime bass singer, both of those men kind of stepped out and quit going with the group, quit traveling, and you and I had the opportunity to step up to a microphone. I kind of sang a lead baritone, and you sang a bass, but I really remember those days fondly. You and I were both teenagers, and we knew everything. Had the world all figured out. Couldn't be told anything, and I'm talking about myself in that now. Both of us. I mean, that's just being part of being a teenager. But it was still when my love for Southern gospel music got born in me, and I do think that's when the seeds of ministry was really planted down deep down for me personally.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, because I was just sitting here thinking, as you was mentioning when you got started, we had gone up, our family had gone up to hear them one night in the Friendship area, or Friendship Church up the old Steams,
Yeah.
Millport Road up in that area.
Right.
And I never will forget Joe telling me, says, Rodney, you wear a coat and tie next time, I'll let you sing. And sure enough, I did. And then from that point forward, about every time we was with him, he'd call me up and let me sing. So the time that Chris and Neil and Joe and Avon all invested into us,
Oh man.
little did they know the seeds that they were planting
Yeah.
and what they were doing in touching our lives, preparing us for something even greater than just local ministry, but, to some degree worldwide, and even in what we're doing. So it's amazing when you stop and think about all the folks that God puts in our paths when we don't even realize that they're put there at that time. But yet now you get our age and you can look back and reminisce. And I say our age, I mean, we're, I guess, considered middle age now. But we still feel young, or at least I hope we do.
Yes, right, I do.
But to look back and to think about all of those guys, and they put up with a lot of us. Me and you would get the short straw and have to sit in the back of the van in those two chairs.
That's right.
And go around the curve, and we'd be leaning into each other, or have the suits, sports coats, all that stuff when we go up to Lawrenceburg and all of that.
Yep.
But getting in 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and getting a little nap and getting ready to go again on Sunday somewhere. And those were good days that I cherish and look back on as very important times in my life, because I think it probably kept me out of a lot of trouble, but also helped gear me in the right direction for being where God could use me. And, you've been there as well. So, and then to look at where we are now and just to think, where we've come from, and it's just amazing to see God's hand at work in all of it. So.
Absolutely, because you mentioned how God places people in our lives, and I don't want to sit down on any part of my story here very long, but definitely we came together as a part of that time. Came from different backgrounds, and at that point in time in my personal life, I came from a broken home, and of course lived in the Millport area with my mom, and being with everyone who was in that group, and especially the elders like Uncle Jake and Avon. You definitely, the time that they put into me, I will guarantee you kept me from going down a pretty bitter path, as a teenager that was facing some tough times during that point in my life. And oh yeah, definitely, God knew what He was doing, and yeah, He did plant those seeds. And even moving on, and kind of do a little fast forward button here. Our paths kind of separated after that, but
Mm-hmm.
still kind of crisscrossed back and forth. I know you and I both did tours of duty with Chosen Witness, which is a group that's
Mm-hmm.
still going today, that
Mm-hmm.
Loretta and Neil and Mark founded together. And you were a founding member when Chosen Witness was formed. And so traveling and singing. And then both of us then really ventured on out into ministry, into church
Mm-hmm.
ministry. And so at this point, if you don't mind, kind of give us a little background. Of course, I know you've made some changes in the last few years ministerially wise, but maybe give us a little background of, your calling into church ministry, and some of your stops along the way.
Sure. Well, one of the things I always go back to this. I knew when I was a junior in high school what God wanted me to do. But I, like a lot of young people, ran, and because I didn't want to preach. Not that uh, preaching wasn't a viable option or a path, but I had other plans. My plans was to go in the funeral business, and of course, some of you folks that may
Oh,
listen to
yeah.
this, I worked there with Dowdle, with George Dowdle at Dowdle Funeral Home for probably 8 years, 9 years. Went through the last couple of years in high school part time, and then went to Jeff State up there in Birmingham for funeral service. And but God just began to move in my heart, uh, and I appreciate those years of ministry there. And of course, we'll get into it in a moment. But I always tell people, my time working at the funeral home, I believe, prepared me for what I'm doing right now, working with a dead church.
Oh.
So, there's a little humor there. Some may not find it humorous, but I do,
I'm laughing.
and I try to tell that because I think it is funny because there are a lot of similarities. And of course, we don't have time. We don't, 2 or 3 podcasts. We might could get into all of that, but we don't have time today to just talk about that. But still, but from there, God just began to work in my heart, and just some things that I knew wasn't right personally from the way I was raised. It was taking me down a path that I really didn't want to go, that I knew better about. And just by the grace of God, He reached down and began to, again, put people in my path that would redirect my focus and back more towards ministry. Now, not that funeral service is not ministry. I believe it is. I believe there's a calling to that. I believe it's an awesome opportunity to be used by God in that situation when families are grieving, and you can do one last thing for mom and dad that it makes it a little easier during that time. But that's not what God called me to, and I knew that, and I was running at that time. But God just began again to orchestrate, put people in my paths that began to change some things. I went into Christian school for a while and taught there, and then finally, on but Father's Day, 1998, I had met earlier that year. I had met my now wife, uh, and I had gone down to meet her family and spend some time with them. And we went to church on Father's Day down there. And something the preacher said in that message just really spoke to my heart, and really got me thinking. Well, that night we'd come back to Birmingham. Ashley was going to school at University of Montevallo, and of course Neil and Loretta lived there. But that night, the bishops, which were very good friends with us through Bama Boys years, and are the end of the Bama Boys term and everything when they'd come into our summer specials and everything.
Right.
We went to hear them at First Baptist Church at Alabaster there, which was just 2 blocks over from where Neil and Loretta lived. And I never will forget Kenny Bishop standing up there that night. And through the course of the concert, he began to talk about the fact that, people are not serving the Lord and where they need to be because they forgot what it was like to be without Christ. And that just hit me. And I mean, that was it. That's when I finally said, "Okay, Lord, I'm tired of running. I'm tired of doing what I want to do, and I'm not happy with that. Um, so I'll do it. I'll do it." And I took the advice that my pastor gave me years earlier, that he said at the time that he surrendered to call to preach. And I don't think it's an answering. I think it's a surrender. I mean, because there's a lot of people that are calling or being called, and there's a lot of people that are answering, and they're answering no to the call that God's placed upon their lives. But he said, look, when I was running, he said my pastor told me, and he says this same thing I'll tell you. You run till you can't run no more, and you can't do anything else. Well, I had done that. I had experimented in several different things: funeral service, Christian school, Christian radio. You know, several things there that I thought was still ministry, and it seemed like each one was getting closer and closer to finally I just said, Lord, I can't do it. I'm not happy. I'll do what you want me to do. And here we are 22 years later, um, living a fulfilled life because I know we're in ministry. We're where God wants us to be. Hadn't always been easy, but it's easier because I know this is where God wants me to be. So that's sort of the fast forward version of it, and as to
Yeah.
where we're at now. So, and through the course of those years, we've pastored in Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, and now Kentucky. And God is just, in each spot, it was a growing opportunity for us to really get to where we are right now.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I've heard folks say, and my calling has never been really geared or steered toward pastoring a church, being the
Mhm.
senior, the lead pastor. Now, definitely feel like I am a pastor and have served as an elder in the church, but I've never had that senior pastor calling. Um, but I've heard those that any kind of ministry, and I definitely have that. I remember the calling into youth ministry that basically got me started into the church ministry, and I'm running from it. I
Mhm.
grew up, and yeah, you and I hung out together, but most of the folks I hung out with as a kid, as a teenager, were 10, 20, 30 years older than me. I didn't
Mhm.
really like young people. I mean, to be honest,
Right.
when I was a young person, I didn't identify. I just didn't get along. It was just tough, and you know everything was being orchestrated by God for me and Janice to serve in youth ministry. And I'm like, but I don't want to. and
Mhm.
and you make
Right.
all these excuses and all these reasons why, and then but God keeps dealing with you. And I've heard it said by several people similar to what I think you said. You said something similar to what I'm fixing to say, in that if you can do anything else, do it. You know,
Mhm.
because if God is calling you to ministry, He's not going to let loose of you. He's not going to turn loose.
Sure.
You cannot outrun God. And
Mhm.
so I've heard folks say that that has especially had some real maybe Jonah experiences, that
Mhm.
really ran from the calling
Right.
to ministry. So yeah, that's a powerful point. So as you served in the local church, and you did serve for several years in the local church ministry and
Mhm.
established, I'd say, I hate to throw around words like established or traditional, but I think folks will know what we mean, in that these churches were long time established. They
Mhm.
they they had a
Mhm.
they existed when you came in to be called as the pastor. They were there. They were established churches. They had a tradition and a history in the area. So you
Mhm.
served in those circumstances and you served those churches well. But I'm picking up that then you started feeling a steering and a calling in a different direction. And
Mhm.
maybe you might talk a little bit about that transition
Sure.
to when you started feeling like there might be something else that God was leading you to do as far as being a pastor.
Sure. Well, it seemed like, and it took several years for me to figure out somewhat what God was doing. Because once 8 or 10 years into it, uh, we began to look back and think about some things and say, okay, this is why God had us here. This is why God had us here. And it seemed like every little church opportunity we had, and a couple of the first two were smaller rural churches. Then I was youth pastor at a church for a time, and then moved to Tennessee to a church. But the bottom line is, it seemed like each church had some sort of um, issue that had happened prior to us going. Um, and difficult time, and it seemed like God was using us for a short period of time with those folks to help encourage them and maybe bring them back around, to help heal some of the hurt. It seemed like we were there through the healing process that these churches were experiencing. It took a while though to figure that out, and so it's almost as though God was just preparing us for that. We had a pretty traumatic experience in Tennessee, and that almost caused us to just throw the towel in. But fortunately, God placed us in a tremendous church in North Mississippi that loved on us. They took us in, and we were there 7 years, and it didn't seem like 7. Those were the quickest 7 years that we had ever ministered somewhere. They were good years, profitable years. When I say profitable, I mean
Right.
success in ministry. It was the oasis that we needed. But even there, the onset was, well, we're not going to move. This is it. We're going to retire here. But 5 years into it, God just began stirring the pot again. Not that anything particularly was going on to disrupt the flow of things, but God has a way of just, just rocking the boat a little bit.
Right.
And maybe some little statements here and there. I had gotten into having, the folks I were having in for revival services were missionaries. And God was just using them and the messages that they would preach to speak more to my heart than maybe to our folks. So we began to see, and just secretly between me and Ashley began to talk about it. Well, okay, maybe we're not going to be here for the rest of our lives, and maybe God has more for us. And sure enough, that the door of opportunity opened for us to be where we're at now. But it took some time. It took some wrestling with it because we were loved by these folks. We were established. Our kids had roots.
Right.
Bella was born there, and she was, building relationships with kids her age. And of course, Dylan and Elena, they had a youth group. They had opportunity to serve. We were involved in community things, and had really established ourselves in the community. Folks knew us when we went to Walmart or wherever, and
Right.
they'd see us, they'd recognize us, and but God just has a way sometimes of pushing us out of our comfort zone. And we don't always like that. We kick the system some, maybe like Paul did, kicked against the pricks a little bit when we're getting poked because we like our comfort.
That's right.
But through it all, God I think has prepared us for this, for what we're doing now, and that's somewhat
awesome.
where we're at.
That's awesome. And yeah, I can definitely understand, even with the feeling that you had of knowing that you were being prepared to be moved, that it's not an easy decision. And, little different circumstance again, because I know you were in North Mississippi, which is not exactly your hometown, but you had planted roots there. You talked about your children being established. And yeah, I also had some experiences, and I served 17 years in one church, and as when it came time that there was going to have to be a change, and that moves were going to have to be made, for me personally, in my spirit, and sometimes I'm a little too open with my feelings, but I mean, it was devastating. I mean, that's my church family. That's my church home. I spent 17 years serving as pastor, 20 years as a member, and the love that was in my heart and still is in my heart for the church and every single person, every single life, every single member in that church. It's strong. And to think about that changing, and then to think about that's the only place that Garrett ever knew. He that was his church from nursery to, till we left. And yeah, so that makes that's where that flesh starts coming in those decisions.
Sure.
And to be honest, about 3, 4, 5 years, I probably tarried with the decisions that needed to be made
Mm-hmm.
purely because, well, first of all, I'm a mix of a champion and a Bouldin, so I'm hard headed. And then there's also those emotions. And I didn't want to go anywhere.
Right.
I did
Right.
not. And so I totally feel you on that, man. But so but the Lord kept dealing with you, and
Mm-hmm.
you knew you were transitioning. And now you are what you would call you are a pastor of what you would call a revitalization of a church. Is that summing up good? Church revitalization is what we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah, that would be the easiest way to describe it. And just leading up to that, our Free Will Baptist denomination had just recently went through some changes on our home mission office a couple of years prior to us getting involved in this, and it brought a gentleman on from Ohio that had taken a church and basically took it from little of nothing and turned it around and was running 500-600 people out in the middle of nowhere or in a smaller area. It's not like he was in Columbus, Ohio, or
Right,
somewhere,
right.
big populations area. So he had been hired by our national home missions department, and our director at the time, which is from the Ewan area.
Okay.
He was born and raised down there, David Crow.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
David. Yeah.
he was wanting to do some things to help some of our churches, because a lot of our churches, and we don't even realize it, and I didn't realize how this has affected a lot of our, but they were dying.
Yes.
I mean, literally just swiveling up on the vine and dying. And we were having churches closed left and right, and he felt impressed to try to do something through our home missions department to not take over these churches, but to reach out to them and say, hey, we have this opportunity here. We'd love to help you if you're willing. And that's how it all come about. And as we began to pray about some things, God, where would you have us to go? What would you do? I actually had the gentleman that was over our department at that time, Jim McComas, come and preach a revival for us. And he began to talk to me about some things, and how, and we began to put two and two together and began to see some things, the paths that we had taken, the churches we had been, the ministries we had been involved in, even in churches, and then even little Christian schools and areas where we had been, that we had worked in. All of it was leading up to this opportunity, where God was preparing us to take this step, but also putting us in places to where we would learn these things that might help and carry us forward. So just in conversation with him, he said, "Hey, why don't you check this out?" And we come up to Louisville one weekend, checked it out, and God just sort of put it on our hearts, and we sort of knew at the time that it was mentioned to us, that would be, this is what God had been preparing us for and was about to move us into. And listen, it's difficult to do that, because you have an established church uh, who has been in a community for a long period of time, and then for them to be willing to take that step to basically restart
Yes.
and replant, and trying to get folks to understand, because church revitalization, it's still one of those things where it's hard for people to understand. Well, why do you need church revitalization? Why can't you just go plant one somewhere?
Right.
uh, and when you look out across our country and you see today that statistics, depending on who you read behind, but I think most of them are in agreement, around 4,000 churches are closing every year,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not planning enough churches to compensate for that. And you're talking places like Louisville, where we're at, which is in the metro area, 1.2 million people. Yeah, they may have churches on every corner, but not every church preaches the Bible.
That's correct.
And that's hard for us to understand sometimes, because we think, well, they're a church, they preach the Bible. Well, they may preach some of it, but they don't preach the entire counsel. They
Right.
don't preach all of it, and some of them have gotten away from it totally,
Yes.
and preaching opinions or whatever.
Right.
Of course, that probably for another podcast as well. But and folks are just, I think we're just, well, we can't go any further. Some are not willing to change at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But or make the changes necessary to get the church back. And I've even thought, and you can back me up on this, even in the area where you're at there, churches that we used to go to on Sunday afternoons to sing are no longer. They're not only are they not having singings, they're not even having services anymore. And if some of them are even in existence, they may not even still look like is even a church. And I don't have any one particular one in mind. I just know, things have changed. And yeah.
You're 100% correct. Um, yeah, while you were talking about that, my mind is racing and driving up and down the highways here, and
Mm-hmm.
I know, I don't know how many people will listen to this, but I think that it would be incredibly. I believe it would be a far stretch to think that someone would not be listening to this. That when they started hearing about church plants and church revitalizations, did not deep down, if they're being honest, get a little bowed up, get a little
Mm-hmm.
aggravated, um,
Mm-hmm.
and and that exists here. You start. I had sat under a sermon from and Brother Lamar Duke just passed away. I think last year he passed away, but he had a cancer battle. But he was the Alabama State Board of Missions church planter. He was the lead pastor for church
Mm-hmm.
planters over the state of Alabama in the Southern Baptist denomination. And I sat under some of his sermons a time or two, listened to him, and I loved his heart. But
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things. The churches who are, and look, I've said this, and boy, I know I've got lips poked out about this, but yeah, full parking lots, big CDs in the bank,
Mm-hmm.
a great budget, church full of staff. That's not the signs of a healthy church.
Right.
That's not the litmus test when it comes down to the Heavenly Father looking at it. And and so many churches who were like that back in my and your day
Mm-hmm.
are now some. And again, I never want to point out any particular church because
Sure.
all churches have faults just like all humans have faults.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I know a church comes to my mind that when I was young, man, they had youth ministers and just a church full of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know now there's about maybe 14 members and they're all
Mm-hmm.
above the age of 60.
Mm-hmm.
That church
Right.
is gone.
Yeah.
I mean, that church is to the point to where without something happening, like a church revitalization plan,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to go away. And and the sad thing is and I'll talk about the Southern Baptist because I guess that's where my I know that's where all my ministry has been and everything. But you know from talking to me, I don't give a flip about denominations.
Sure.
I care about the
Sure.
Word of God, just like you said, being preached in full counsel
Mm-hmm.
and being in His will and His way. But Southern Baptists are notorious for not wanting change, and I know that so many. I've served and seen. I've sat in on the business meetings. I've sat in on the deacons meetings. I've sat in on the meetings where it's all about taking care of the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
There's strongholds in place. There's things that we won't touch. There's things that we will not change. And, even to the point where I'm afraid that we get to the point where we'll go ahead and lock the doors before we will give in to saying maybe we need help. Maybe we need somebody with a fresh perspective. Maybe we
Mm-hmm.
need somebody with a fresh calling to come in and do a reboot.
Right.
Let's get a fresh take, a fresh start on this. I read one thing on as far as the revitalization goes. I don't know how it is and you can talk about the process on this that you took in just a second, but I've heard that one thing that is done is on a full reboot is when somebody comes in, basically it's a fresh start where all church officers, deacons, such as
Mm-hmm.
that, we clean slate.
Mm-hmm.
We look out, and boy, you talk about getting some dander raised, but
Right.
but sometimes, look, sometimes, and I am guilty of this. when I talk about this, I'm not talking down. I need a mirror right here on this wall in my studio, because I have sat in and I have participated in the country club church. I'm just saying I'm guilty. All I'm saying in that statement is I'm guilty of sitting
Mm-hmm.
there, and it's easy to let the things of the world and the business model. Hey, there's a lot of pastors being put out by Southern Baptist seminaries. I'll just talk again about that denomination because that's who I am, or who I've been. They're putting out a lot of pastors who are sent out with a business model,
Mm-hmm.
a marketing business model, how to build a successful church. Well, why don't we send it out with the second chapter of Acts,
Right.
and start moving through the book of Acts and through the Pauline letters? Let's start building church that way. But
Right.
you're with me. You know all.
Sure.
I got on a little rant there, but but I feel like maybe you can amen that, or kind of that's
Sure.
where it comes from, and where the need for you to come in as a church revitalizer.
Yeah.
I think that's where it comes in. So all that to say, then, so you move into this process. You have a church that you're going to go into. Can you talk a little bit about then, once that was determined, once you yielded to that call, and once the place was appointed for you to go, what that process looked like?
Yeah, and before I do, I just want to say it's not just Southern Baptist. It's all of your mainstream denominations that are struggling with this. And I know you're not just singling one of them
No.
out, but there may be folks listening that are part of other denominations and stuff. But and the sad reality is, now if you go on and Google church revitalization, you're going to find these statistics. They say, and I say they, those that know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're looking at about 10 to 15% of the churches in general are really what you would consider a thriving, on fire church. Then you would have a small percentage equal to that, 10 to 15%, that are just dead.
Yeah.
And most of it don't know. But then you have that percentage in between, which could be anywhere from 75 to 80% of our churches that do not even realize they're in decline.
Right.
And that's the sad thing. You alluded to it. If they look at it, they look and say, well, we can pay our pastor, we can pay our bills. You know, we've got people coming. Yeah, maybe not as many as we want, but we can make this payment. We can do this. We can do this, and we have a little setback for a rainy day.
Right.
We're good. You know, we're good. We're okay. Well, you know, we're living in a time where okay is not good enough.
That's right.
You know, as the commercial says that we see on TV sometimes, okay is just not good enough.
Right.
You know, we are in a battle that we don't even realize, or if we realize it, we have forgotten
Right.
the importance of the battle that we're in. And as you said, we would rather die with our church, with me being in control of it, than me making the necessary changes to make it better and improve it, and it becoming a missional church like the church that we read about in Acts,
Right.
a church that's on mission.
That's right.
And we've gotten off mission. That's why we're dying.
Right.
We have gotten off mission of what's important. What is the mission of the church? It's to go and disciple. It's to go and teach and preach and baptize. And you know as well as I do, that passage is not just talking about dunking them under the water,
That's right.
you know, and getting it done, but it deals with discipling them and teaching them how to live Scripture, and that's something that we've gotten away from.
Yes, sir.
Our focus has gotten off of preaching the how to live and how to live victoriously.
And I do want to jump in. Yeah, yeah. Going back to, just in case, for my Southern Baptist friends, yeah, I love every single one of you. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the big thing about me is I'm just big transparent. I don't like to ever look like I'm talking down to.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
so the way that I give examples is I talk about myself, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I appreciate you saying that it's all denominations and wide sweeping, but yeah, I'm not being mean toward
No,
toward
no.
that toward my denomination, but it's just I feel more comfortable talking about what I know than pointing fingers out and
Sure,
saying y'all, because
sure,
it's not y'all, it's we, and
sure.
so yeah. So thanks for clearing that up for me.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I had to do that. I had to watch that when I was on itinerant, because I could say certain things certain times when I was speaking, and I could tell the air just suck out of the room, and I was like, "Oops,
You
I
too,
might
huh?
not ought to mention that again in that tone." But church revitalization is something that's new to a lot of people, and they don't fully understand it. And that was part of the problem, and part of it here where we're at. They think, oh, well, we're getting a new preacher. Okay, you call. We got a new preacher on board. And it's more than just that. Fortunately, the church where we're at now had just gotten down to 8 people that were coming. And those 8 people, I mean, they were to the point of closing. And the state of Kentucky, we have 120, 27, 26, 27 churches, Free Will Baptist churches here in Kentucky, and majority of those are over in East Kentucky. And I sort of kid around with folks, and I doubt very seriously any of them will hear it. But if they do, I'm just kidding with this. But you go up a holler and you have a Free Will Baptist church over there, basically. That's how 120 of those churches are in East Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you could draw a line down the middle and Lexington being the middle of the state, you come east or west of Lexington and you only have about 6 churches. And majority of the population of Kentucky lives where there's only 6 churches or 6 Free Will Baptist churches. And Louisville being one of those, where there's 1.2 million people here in the metro area, we only have one Free Will Baptist church. Well, does that matter? Well, it does, because this church has been here about 58, 59 years, almost 60 now. I guess this would be the technical 60th year of it. But to have been here, and you look back over those years and you see the pastors who have come and preached, you see it in its heyday when it was running 90 to 100 people. You see the sweat and the blood and the tears that went into it to make it or to help it become a light in this community. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing there. Uh, it's almost a slap in the face to those who have come before, just to let it die and not do anything about it. Those pastors who have invested themselves, their lives into this ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and that was one of the things that really drew us to this. Not because we wanted to move to a big city. That wasn't it. I'm a country boy at heart.
Right.
You know, I would rather be out in the middle of nowhere where I could have a garden and work, go deer hunt, fish, whatever, all of that, and not have to travel to do that. Um, but so when we got here, there were only 8 people, and something needed to be done. And our folks here in Kentucky, they said, we don't want to lose that church. So much has been invested in that church, and we want to do our best to keep it. We believe there's opportunity here. And I don't know if you were familiar with the term nuns, NONES, uh, but if you look that up on online and stuff, research that out. Here in the Louisville area, back several years ago, I don't know what the latest, but 4 or 5 years ago, 45% of the folks in Louisville considered themselves being nuns, meaning they had no affiliation whatsoever with church.
Right.
And you can go and research that in your local community and find out what that is, and you would be blown away
Yes.
uh, at the number of people that would consider themselves to not have any affiliation with religion, church, or anything. And I would challenge you that are listening to go check that out, and just see what the stats are in your community. Um, and 45% of it, 45% of 1.2 million. I'm not good with math, so we're just going to round up. So that's a 500,000 people, that have no affiliation whatsoever with church. So even in a community where there's churches pretty much on every corner, is there a need for a church? There's a need for a church that's going to preach the gospel
That's right.
and win souls for the kingdom. And that's what we're doing. And our folks realize that. And one of the things that we did when we come in, uh, they approached our home missions department and said, "Hey, we really want to do this. We want help, and we're willing to do whatever we can." So we come in while we were working on itinerant. We would be here one Sunday a month and preach and teach, do some things, just try to lay some groundwork. But then once we got our support raised, we shut the doors to the church, and for 6 months, I told them, I said, we're not having church. I know that sounds bad, but if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, and we're going to start fresh. So in the process, we changed the name of the church from First Free Will Baptist Church to Connection Free Will Baptist Church, or Connection Church. A Free Will Baptist Fellowship is technically what's on the sign, but it is registered as a Free Will Baptist Church for those that may be wanting to know. But anyway, uh, so we did that. We come in and we remodeled, and we really needed to. Man, if I could show you the pictures, man, it was horrible. When we come and visited, there was mold, mildew all over the bottoms of the pews and the walls and the baseboards and the doors and the hymn books. I mean, you picked up a hymn book and it felt fuzzy, and you wasn't in the
Wow.
'60s and '70s. I mean, you looked at it, and it, I mean, stuff's kind of, and you just get sick.
Wow.
Just thinking about it. That's how far it had gone, uh,
Hmm.
and not even realizing that they had gotten in that situation. So we did everything. We got rid of everything that I could get rid of, and we remodeled and modernized it a little bit. Of course, I use that word loosely, but uh, basically what we did, we ripped out the carpet, put new carpet in. We redone the stage. We took out the pews and put chairs in, um, and we repainted. And that's basically what we did, and that helped a lot. That
Sure.
helped tremendously.
Hmm.
Um, so now and then we relaunched in October of 18. So we've been at it now a little over a year, almost a year and a half, I guess, a little over a year and a half, as Connection Church, where we're here every Sunday. We're having at least one service a month. Prior to COVID, we were doing Bible study on Sunday afternoon, so we had started doing that and trying to lay the foundations through Bible study, just basically starting over with basic biblical principles and teaching them, going through church covenant, going through, the steps of a new Christian, just basically starting from scratch and teaching these folks, because they had not had it. The folks that were still holding on to it, they had not had the teachings of those in the past. And, we could probably sit here and debate why it got in that situation, why it found itself there, and that's for another day.
Sure.
That's the importance behind it is they got to the point where they realized they needed help, and if they didn't get the help, if they were not willing to make the necessary changes, they were going to die, and
Hmm.
literally shut the doors.
Right.
And I believe several of these folks would have never gone to another church, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
But they saw that, they allowed the change to take place without any issues. Um, so it's been it's been something that's needed,
Yeah.
but it's taking a long time to get this. Like I said, we've been at it a year and a half now. We have been able to pick up a couple of families, one in our immediate neighborhood that they've been several times, and um, it's just taking time. It's
Sure.
not easy to do this. A lot of folks say it's easier to start one from scratch than it is to restart one, and I'm beginning to believe that, because just seeing the building, there's I can't put my finger on it, but I think there's a stigma that comes with it. Maybe folks in the community who's been hurt in the past,
Exactly.
not realizing that
Yes.
things are different, and
Yes.
and see, that's again, we could go a lot of different podcasts with this,
Sure.
but
And we may.
uh, the bottom line is just it's taking time to reestablish who we are,
Hmm.
opening up as a new church with a new name, trying to establish who we are in this community. It's taking time, and our folks are beginning to see some things. Obviously, this COVID did not help us any as we were
Right.
gaining a little bit of momentum. It's now
Hmm.
set us back. I mean, obviously 3 months, because 2.5 of that we didn't have services.
Right.
But by the time we get back up and running and being able to really invite people and have them come and do things to reach out to them with community events and things like that, without all of these restrictions and everything, it may be 6 months to a year
True.
before we get back on track. So we're having to deal with that now. But that's pretty much what we're doing and where we're at. I know that's probably a longer answer to what you were saying or questioning a while ago, but
No, that's exactly
that is somewhat as to where we're at, because it's a whole new thought to the folks, because we don't even do Sunday school, and that's hard. Coming from a conservative
that's right. Yeah.
background, traditional. I'm not one for change. I just don't like change. But I've had to make myself change on some things.
Right.
I mean, used to, you wouldn't see me without a coat and tie if I was preaching.
That's
Now
right.
I don't. I
Right.
don't wear one because, folks in my community, where we're at, our little church here, the ones we're trying to reach, they're not doctors and lawyers.
Yep.
We're not in the rich part of Louisville. We're in a community that's probably middle to lower income.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the median income is $25,000 to $30,000 a year,
Right.
and that's not much, especially living in Louisville.
In Louisville, right.
But I try to dress to where they're going to accept me and not look down at me, and I can respond to them, and that just sort of goes against everything I was taught. Especially coming from funeral service background and all of that, learning the rules of etiquette and all of that stuff, and
right.
and how to treat people. And now I'm doing things different, and so even music. I grew up on hymns, and 3 hymns, an offering, a special, and preach, an invitation, and go home. But learning how to step out of your box sometimes really makes those little changes, makes big differences. And that's one thing George Dowdle always tried to teach me when we was working there at the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
He'd say, Rod, and I don't know why he called me Rod for short, but he'd say, Rod, it's the little things that matter the most.
Oh, yeah.
I thought I'd have that body laid out in perfection, and he'd come along and change something else. And I picked up that bad habit because I'll do it. I mean, it's just some little something I'm going to change. But, I appreciate what George was trying to teach me during those years, because I've now been able to apply that even in ministry. It's the little things. You make those little tweaks, and you can make folks, not that you're trying to manipulate them or anything, but you just that little bit, it makes that appearance that you've gone above and beyond.
That's right.
And so, and I had to do that to myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had to I wrestled with that and struggled with that to make it just a whole different, for a lack of a better word, culture within the church. One term that we use now is DNA. Changing the DNA within the church.
Right.
Getting it out of the traditional state of mind, because traditionalism, I believe, has in many cases killed a church.
Sure.
Or is killing the church.
I agree.
We've had. I don't know if you want me to say, you can edit it if you want to, but it's almost as though we become pharisaical in our approach to it, because so many of the things that we have added have become, they're traditions, and it's hard to take away those traditions, and we're not willing to take away those traditions, those man-made traditions, and it's having its effect on us, and it's not a good effect. It's not a positive effect.
Right.
It's killing us.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the folks around here that know me, that will listen to this podcast, will probably think that I steered you towards saying that pharisaical statement, because
you did not.
Because
you did not. Let's make that clear.
I'm really big on that, and I get a lot. I'm really. You talked about when you would get up and you would say something, and I would say one of my faults is probably sometimes I'm a little too. I believe in shooting straight, and sometimes when I shoot straight, it can come across not like I want it to. But I'm just being, I'm really big on being transparent and being honest. And everything that you said is spot on. And I love, because you really covered in this discussion already. One thing that I had listed down was to talk about some challenges with this. And I think they've already kind of been touched and covered. And most of the challenges would be along those lines of traditionalism. Hey, I mean, I'm the same way. I came up from a different way, and I was the same way when I first started leading music in church. I would make the ugly statement that as long as I was doing it, it's going to be out of the hymn book with a piano.
Right.
And, I had an encounter at a youth conference. And now I do not like orchestrated church. I do not like any kind of man made orchestrated worship experience. And you know what I mean by that,
Mm-hmm.
like we get,
Mm-hmm.
making something happen. But I was in a group of about 2,000 kids, and I saw 2,000 kids that come probably from mostly churches like ours that were very traditional, and the worship leader was using some of that confounded new music.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I saw young people having an encounter with the Lord, like
Mm-hmm.
actually freely lifting up the name of Jesus in
Mm-hmm.
thankfulness with hearts of praise. And I tell people, it's like God grabbed me by the neck and is like, who are you to decide what is adequate and correct worship? Now, there
Mm-hmm.
are some biblical pieces to the
Mm-hmm.
worship. I mean, when you're talking about things and with modesty and things in order, and then there's things that needs to be in place. But what I'm saying is the traditionalism. I remember I heard an encounter a worship leader had, and around here, even some of our churches who do who maybe have ditched the formal dress for their pastors, whether it be the speaking pastor or the worship pastor or whatever. They dress more casual. Even when it comes Lord's Supper time, well, then we
Mm-hmm.
have to put on the coat and the tie. And a worship pastor one time was talking to the congregation about that, and he's like me. I can't stand a necktie. Now I wear it, but
Sure.
um, it's just not my favorite thing. I'm a whole lot more comfortable in overalls than I am a coat and tie, and I wouldn't wear overalls so much to church, but you know what I mean.
Gotcha.
But anyway, he made the conference and referenced scripture about how God does not look at man as man does, but God looks straight to the heart, and how God is much more uh, concerned for that Lord's Supper service with the condition of the heart than whether the pastor and the deacons have on coats and ties.
Mm-hmm.
And he got reprimanded.
Mm.
He got reprimanded now by leadership. But that is the choking effect of this traditionalism. And it becomes so Pharisaic. So many of those things are man-made tradition. Now, is there anything wrong with a coat and tie?
No.
Absolutely
No.
not. But when
No.
it becomes the focus point, when it becomes a stumbling block, when it becomes a stronghold, then we've moved our focus away, and and we've lost sight of that first love. We've
Mm-hmm.
lost our direction. So I'm totally, and I would have to guess that for all church revitalizers, that the strongholds and the traditionalism are the major hindrances to that. And then I also love something that you spoke about in coming to what you're doing now, and as far as teaching Bible, and how you talked about going back to the basics,
Mm-hmm.
and even the church covenant. Now that's one thing, and I notice every church I go into, I look and see if there's a church covenant hung somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and I guarantee you, in most churches, and most churches have it stuck at least somewhere. If it's not in the sanctuary, it's in the foyer or it's in a hallway, fellowship hall somewhere. There's usually a church covenant.
Right.
But if you started asking those members about the parts and the pieces and what it means for them to be a member
Mm-hmm.
of that church per
Mm-hmm.
the church covenant, they don't know. And they especially don't know the whys, because
Right.
the basic church covenant, where I do think there's some things that has snuck into the covenant that might be a little traditionalism, by and large, the church covenant is taken straight from Scripture. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, everything in there that members are agreeing to live by as being a member of the church is scriptural. I think it's amazing, a great idea for a new church plant, a church revitalization, and even if somebody's listening to this and neither one of those apply, go back and teach those
Sure.
church covenants. Go back and teach the biblical foundation and the biblical structure for that church covenant, and get back to the basics. I wrote something this morning on Facebook, and I was talking about the song "Loving God, Loving Each Other"
Mm-hmm.
that Bill and Gloria Gaither wrote, and the verse says, "We tend to make things harder, build steeples out of stone, and we fill books with explanations of the way." And in some ways, when I hear some pastors that I've heard come straight out of seminaries and start preaching, they've read too many books and
Right.
they haven't read enough in the book, if that
Right.
makes any sense. Get
Yes.
back to the foundation scriptures and teach
Mm-hmm.
the basics. So I think, to me, you just gave a wonderful blueprint. If you wanted to hit a reboot button on your church, as far as the teaching, where even if they're not going through a restart,
Mm-hmm.
if the pastor and the deacons, the leadership, the elders in the church want to take a look and do a reboot, kind of a refresh, you gave a good blueprint. Go back to the basics. Go back to
Sure.
those basics and just go from there, because we take. I remember a deacon, and it's a man who is one of the most admired men in my life of serving with deacons in church ministry. I admire him and loved him with all my heart. An older guy, but he flat out spoke and told that he had not been discipled.
Mm.
He had not been poured into scripturally and with Bible teaching like he needed to be. And this was at that time an 80-something-year-old gentleman. We can't take for granted that everybody's got it, that everybody
Sure.
knows, and you have different levels of spiritual maturity. And even though there may be snow on the mountaintops, on the peaks, or they may
Mm-hmm.
have gray hair, that doesn't mean that they're spiritually mature. And I
Right.
think we need to go back, and we do. We need to go back to the basics. So you hit on a lot of good meat there, brother, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I think I think you gave a lot of good items to consider for all churches, not just some. Because hopefully, most people who are listening to this is they're not going to be in a part of a church that's to that point, like what you spoke of, where and
Right.
what I spoke of, where basically it's a goner, without having a total wipe the slate clean. But I figure that everybody that is listening, and maybe everybody's too big, but it's got to be in the 90 something percentile. All of our churches have some work to do. All
Mm-hmm.
of us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what, no matter where we stand, I think we all, and it should be our heart to want to be the church that God called us to be, to want to be a replica of the blueprint for the church that the Lord gave us in His Word. And
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe it's some pride that we need to swallow. I know I've had to swallow a lot of pride in the past. Maybe we need to humble ourselves a little bit. But I think you gave a lot of good material for any church to use, to maybe try to do a litmus test, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
look at the plumb line and see where we measure up. And if we see that we may have a little waiver there, maybe a good little plan to kind of move back.
Sure.
I would surely hope that everyone wants our churches to be what God would have them to be,
Oh, no doubt.
especially if they claim a title of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if
Sure.
they are an elder or a deacon in the church. That I would hope that it, before making the prominent families happy, before making the ones who write the biggest checks happy, before following all the things that we have to do because we've did them that way for 50 years, I would hope that that all takes a back seat to the hearts that we would have to following the Lord. That would be
Sure.
my hope. If it's not, we've got some work to do.
Oh, sure. And I would recommend too, Scott. You mentioned that as an assessment. You can find assessments online for church revitalization, and they're just basic questions that you could look at and figure out. Take for yourself, take for your church. Where do we stand? Is there areas that we can improve on? And it's just like anything else. Why do we go to a mirror? To
That's
see
right.
if there's any imperfections there. And if there are, more times than not, we're going to fix it before we walk away. I know when I check my hair, you and I both have been this way with our hair for years. You won't
Come
go
on
back.
now.
Yeah, we, we folks couldn't even go to the bathroom after we changed at churches because the hairspray, the fog of hairspray.
Now you're
So
meddling.
I know, but we do that, and even to this day, I'm still particular about my hair because I want to look good. I don't want it to be messy,
Right.
especially if I'm going to be in front of people, and that's. But I'm not trying to put on a show either. That's not what I'm saying. But we look into a mirror. Well, what is the Word of God to us? We're taught that it is a looking
That's
glass.
right.
Well, you look into it, you see, and be honest. You got to be honest.
That's right.
Sometimes we don't want to be honest with it, but
Hmm.
uh, one of the things that I've tried to get across to our people is the importance of making connections
Hmm.
in our churches. We get so lax on not fulfilling the mission because we just assume people know where we're at. We know they know who our church is. They know folks, and we don't ask anymore. We don't seek to get people to come. Um, we just assume because we have a church, folks are going to come. It's
Right.
almost like the Field of Dreams movie. If you build it, they'll come. Well, that's not true anymore, especially where we live here in Louisville, where it's a multicultural community. I mean, we have folks from all over the world living here, just within a literal stone's throw of where I'm living. I have Hispanics, I have Nepalis, I have Cubans, which I guess you could claim them as Hispanics. But we have all these different religions, different folks, and all, and folks don't always know. So I try to encourage our people to make connections,
Yeah.
and that's part of the reasons why we use the name Connection Church. Um, because I tell them, I think one of the things that you had mentioned to me, is there a mission statement for the church? It is. It is to connect people with Christ. That's our, connect with people, and then connect people with Christ, because He's the one that's ultimately going to make the difference in their lives. But then from there, we connect them to church. Obviously, we want to connect them to our local church, our church, because that's what we're trying to do, is build a church, grow a church. But we also then want to teach them to go back and connect with community. It's not just to get saved and sit on a pew and be a number on a board. It's not just that. It's to be involved. It's to go back out and repeat that process again with somebody else that they know in their circle of influence,
Yes.
and to try to get our people to understand, hey, you got to do it. And that's asking a lot of folks to step out of their comfort zone,
Right.
to go and invite somebody to come to church. But that's necessary if we're going to build churches, whether it's church plants, church revitalizations, or even in our local community in the quote unquote established churches. If we don't get out and make these connections with people, we'll never be what God would have us to be as far as the church goes.
Amen,
And
brother.
I try to tell them that and teach them that and make that part of our structure, our DNA structure, um, because it's important, and getting them to realize that people uh, are important. Somebody at some point in time knocked on their door or spoke to them, and they're where they're at today because they responded to that conversation about God, and it needs to be carried forward.
That's right.
One of our images that we use for that, obviously, we use the cross for Christ, church for church, but for community, I used a puzzle piece. And if you think about a puzzle piece, it has normally the one we have as our symbol has two outputs and two inputs. I
Hmm.
don't know what those little things are called. That's just what I call them. But I'm sure there's a technical name for those rounded edges on a puzzle piece or those slots. But I tell them, I said, look, there's two outputs, there's two inputs. So why did you use that? Well, I want our folks to know that they need to output, they need to put out in the community, but also when people come, they have opportunity to plug in
Yes.
and have input into our church. I'm not trying to build a church where it's just centered around me and my family.
Right.
I'm trying to get folks discipled to put them in those positions to teach Sunday school, to teach Bible classes, to teach, whatever. If I'm not there, to lead singing, to be part of the ministry aspect.
Hmm.
And and that's all part of it's all about making those connections, discipling people, getting them to that point to where they're confident that they can go out and share the gospel with people without having to feel inferior to them or to the other person.
Right.
But because I think that's where we're at. I think some of our issues today, we folks don't know how to share Christ.
Oh,
They don't know
absolutely.
how to have that conversation with somebody. Um, maybe out of fear. But we serve a God that there's no need for us to fear.
That's right.
You know, uh, so and there again, there's a lot of other things that we could go down on that,
Sure.
but that's why we use the word connection.
That's
You know,
great.
and because I wanted our folks to realize that hey, we've got to make connections with people, and when I do newsletters and stuff, which I do monthly to let our supporters know. That's one of the things I remind them. Make sure you are making connections in your own community, uh, because people need it.
That's
They
right.
need the Lord. Even in rural counties, in our states, there's people that, and you'll be surprised. There's people that have never stepped foot in the door before. They don't know who David is. They don't know who Daniel is. They don't know who Jesus
That's
is,
right.
other than just a curse word that is used because they see it on TV.
That's right.
You know,
I agree with
uh,
you.
so we need to make sure that our people are making connections in communities to wherever they're at, for the sake of the God. And if we just get back to our mission,
Hmm.
we'd probably see a lot of revitalization works.
Amen. That's right. Amen. That's right. And boy, that's uplifting and encouraging to me. You lit me on fire then at the end with that, and yeah, your mission statement is spot on with that connecting and connection, and that's what it's all about. And I'm excited for you. I know we've gone a little over an hour here, so probably a good place to wrap up. Some point in time when it's convenient for you, we might come back on and chase another rabbit trail if you would like to. But
Sure, sounds good.
I think there's a lot of other doors and areas we could go to. But I definitely appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today, Rodney. I think the world of you. I really do. And I definitely keeping you in your church plant or your church revitalization, I'm sorry, in our prayers, and keeping you and your family as your own side in our prayers, and we'll continue to do so. Hey, maybe sometime could make that little short trip and visit with you guys sometime. I would
Sure,
love to do that
sure.
and see y'all up there. But do thank you for spending time with me, and if I can ever do anything for you, you can just give me a call. But for our listeners, I just thank you for tuning in again with us. And if you haven't subscribed or followed us on the podcast app that you're listening on, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcast, if you would click that follow or subscribe button, you won't miss any of the episodes that we put out. And also, if you would share us, we'd really appreciate that. I hope you enjoy the conversations that we have on here. And if you ever have any suggestions, you can send us an email at Scott at sbm.space, SPACE, and we'd love to hear from you. But again, we just thank you, Rodney, for joining us, and hope we look forward to having you again sometime.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
All right, Rodney. Thank y'all again for listening to us. Well, we love y'all. Y'all have a great day. God bless you.